Yes, sir.
Members and Colonel, I remember that as the OIG's investigatory efforts increased, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we began hearing numerous accounts from targeted providers who felt their due process rights were unfairly limited and in some cases non-existent. We heard stories about OIG's investigatory and hearing process not being uniform and subjective. You mentioned a little while ago that 78 cases have been dismissed. They've been dismissed over what period? The last month, 2 months, 3 months?
So I don't know the period of time of those
but
cases.
Very recent.
I believe they have been recent. I believe they have been over the past 5 to 6 months.
Okay. And you also mentioned the issue of payment holds. So one of the things that really has bothered me, and I think, again, if you were here last session hearing some of the testimony, you got the sense that this was an agency that instead of doing what we'd asked them to do, which is go find real cases of fraud, credible allegations of fraud, and it's one of the big things that the Sunset staff identified for us, that the OIG's office was in fact looking at clerical errors and counting them as credible allegations of fraud, right? And then we found out this summer about, or not this summer, I guess it was around September or October, somewhere around there, about Brad Nelson. Why don't you tell us about Brad Nelson a minute? I want the members to know who Brad Nelson was. We can mention him in this forum, can't we?
Yes, sir, I believe we can.
Go ahead.
And I have my lawyer back here who advised me.
Where's
step
your
over the
lawyer?
line. Joyce Sparks is here, my chief counsel.
Did they give you a thumbs up?
She can come join me and maybe help me answer this question.
Oh, you want to register?
She
Okay.
did. I will first say that Brad Nelson is one of our actuaries. In Medicaid provider integrity cases, one of the techniques we use is extrapolation. And Brad Nelson was one of our actuaries who handles extrapolation for several cases. And I think it was determined that...
And what, by the way, let me jump in. So members, those of you that haven't followed this as closely as some of us have, so they would find problems, right? They'd say, oh, well, this file or this case, we believe that they charged when they shouldn't have, or they did a treatment they shouldn't have, or really forgot to cross a T or dot an I when they should have done that too. So we're going to count that against them. And so let's say they found 10 files where there were problems with them. Then they would say, all right, let's look back 5 years or 3 years, however many. We'll just figure that 10 times however many cases they've got, you know, figuring out. We'll extrapolate. We'll come up with a number. We will assume that even though we found 10 out of 60, we're just going to assume that every 10 out of every 60, this doctor cheated. Okay? That's what the extrapolation was. So this Brad Nelson was one of the guys that would sit there and say, let me figure out what we're going to assume they've done wrong, how many times they've cheated. Is that right?
That's a pretty close representation. It's very simplified, yes.
We think in simple terms here, buddy.
Yes, sir. The actuary takes the data that they get. The investigator punches the data into the form that the actuary creates for the extrapolation. It's full of formulas. It takes a doctorate in math to understand it all. But the actuary oversees that. And in the case of Brad Nelson, the procedure at the time was that the work would come into the actuary to establish the worksheet for the investigator, and I believe set up the random number generator that would pick the random sample. And it would go back out to the investigator, and the investigator would go and collect those records, and then those records would be given to the consultant, and they would both fill in the form with all the errors, which would determine the error rate based on a historical error rate as well. And then all that would be done. It would come back to the actuary, and the actuary would run the extrapolation and then send it back out to the investigator. Well, Mr. Nelson, Brad Nelson, was, we didn't have any checks and balances on that apparently, so he was doing all this work himself on these investigations, and no one was checking that. And he did some things that were apparently not right. And I believe he's since been, he no longer works in the organization, and we have reviewed those cases. I don't think it was as transparent as some would like, but we have gone back and we've reviewed those cases, and we're taking the necessary, we're making the necessary adjustments on those.
The reference there, let me interrupt, members, the reference to not as transparent as some would like is that when we found out about this, and not because the agency told us, by the way, we found out about it because one of the doctors that was challenging the agency findings and was taking it to a SOA hearing, they sort of by accident found out that this employee had been fired, and they asked why, and they found out that they had been fired because, again, they were apparently not accurate in figuring out what a doctor owed. And that's how we found out about it. Well, when I found out about it, I asked then Inspector General to Doug Wilson to let me know which cases this person had worked on. And after 2 or 3 days of talking to you, I guess, and others, you all made me sign a confidentiality agreement. The only way you'd let me know which cases he had worked on is if I signed something saying that I would not tell anybody which cases they worked on. Now, I don't think that's good. Maybe others do. But it seems to me that if somebody works for a state agency and essentially has committed enough wrong that you felt like you needed to fire him because they were working on files that inaccurately indicated that someone had cheated the government out of some money, and he upped the numbers to make it look better, and you fire him, it would seem to me that should be public information, but I guess it's limited public information. That's probably something we should talk about later this session. So that was the reference where he said not as transparent, certainly as I think it should be. If somebody works for the government, okay, and they go do something to hurt people in the public or not be fair to them, I don't think we should cover that up in any way. And I felt that that's essentially what Doug Wilson was doing there, was covering. He didn't want to show it to me. I had to ask him for a while. Anyway, so what was he doing?
So the point taken from that for us, yes, is the transparency, but there's also a sunset issue related to that, and we should be much more forthcoming in notifying providers or any organization that any of those type of cases affect. I don't know all the details, but I don't think we were as forthcoming as we should have, and we've got that. We will develop a solution to that.
Let me tell you something, man. As I understand it, we were meeting in Sunset already. Sunset staff have been, here I am talking like I'm mad at you. I'm not mad at you. I'm kind of mad at her, but I'm not mad at you. But I'm telling you, we did not find out about him about the things that he was doing and then y'all firing him until a couple of lawyers from the private sector getting ready for a SOA hearing and doing depositions stumble on it, and it gets out. And we found out about it through the press because one of the lawyers told somebody in the press. That's just not good. When something like that happens, y'all didn't tell Jane Nelson. She chairs the Sunset Commission. You didn't tell Vice Chair Price. He's the vice chair. You didn't tell any of us on these committees. You knew we're in the middle of trying to make something better that was obviously not doing a very good job, and you sort of neglect or decide that that's not something we needed to know, that you had somebody in-house that was cooking the numbers to try to make doctors look bad. That doesn't make sense to me. I've only been here 20 years. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know about you, doctor. You've just been here 2 months or a month. Does it make sense to you?
No, sir.
Chair King, hold on. Chair King, did you want to say?
Yes, thank